Greetings, race community. Brent coming in live with today's guest, Scott Mory, who serves as Vice President for University Advancement at Carnegie Mellon University. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Brent. Good to be here.
Well, we had the opportunity to connect in person at the Case Summit just over a month ago in Chicago. And so not typical for me to get some in real life podcast prep, given that this thing was started basically 5 minutes before a pandemic. So that felt pretty good, and it was good to see you.
You as well.
That being said, we're going to cover ground that we did not cover in our prep. And one of my favorite questions for my guests has really just been to learn a little bit more about your own higher education journey. So why don't you take me back to junior year at Rutgers Prep? Who was that guy? What was he into? And what led him to George Washington University?
Oh, well, I was the first in my own immediate family, first of my siblings to go to college. And so my parents and I looked at a lot of places as we were trying to figure out where to go. And GW was the first place where when I stepped on the campus, I felt like I was meant to be there. There was something about the energy of it, the people that were there, the proximity to the White House, and kind of all these things you grew up reading about as a kid. There was just something about the place that felt really magical for me. And I remember we walked out of the visitor center on the tour, and my mom kind of got like a stupid look on her face. And I'm like, what? And she's like, this is where you're supposed to be. And we both kind of had that feeling about the place, and turned out to be right. I stayed there for undergrad and for law school.
So I grew up in Iowa, which people who've listened to the podcast are tired of hearing about. But I really did not travel very much until I went to college, but I did have the opportunity to do a leadership trip to Washington, D.C. my junior year of high school, which was basically my first time ever on the East Coast. And there is something just truly magical about that first time in Washington, D.C., especially at I don't know, that life stage where we were learning about civics and we were, sort of doing social studies and history and all of those things. It really is an amazing place that, now having had the opportunity to spend so much time there, as I know you have as well, it's a little sad how quick it fades and how quick it just becomes normal. But that first experience you're describing is so poignant.
Well, I graduated from high school in 1992, and that was a big election year between Bush and Clinton. And so I think just already at that time, you already kind of saw that it was going to be, if there was a year to be in Washington, it was going to be that year. I guess you could say that every 4 years. But I think I grew up doing model Congress and things like that in high school. And so, at that point, we're all still kind of aspiring presidents and senators and cabinet members if you're bent that way. So it really just seemed like a natural place to go to school.
And so tell me about the transition there when you think about the first year. I mean, clearly, based on some of what I'm seeing in your background, you did not sit idle during your time at GW and got pretty engaged with a bunch of activities. But what was your tribe?
Yeah, I was really involved in student government and was actively involved in the student senate. I was a tour guide, so I was very involved with the admissions office. I was on orientation staff, kind of one of those just involved people, and quick to sign up for everything, and made a lifelong group of friends through those affiliations that are still around today. And I think maybe that was kind of the politics itch. I ended up finding it on campus as opposed to Capitol Hill. Once I kind of realized the conditions that Capitol Hill interns work under, it quickly became an unattractive position for me, even though I know so many people who kind of went that route and kind of did the full DC experience. I ended up finding everything I wanted on campus.
What are those conditions? I actually don't know too much about it. What was the word on the street?
Well, I think in those days, it was long. Well, it's still these days, long hours, no pay, grunt work, a lot of reading mail.
So instead, you decided to be a lawyer? I mean, that sounds kind of similar.
Well, I didn't decide to be a lawyer. I kind of got advised to go to law school, which is a very different thing, Brent.
Fair enough. So tell me more about that. At what point did you get the twinkle in your eye around law school?
Well, actually, I was very fortunate to develop a friendship with Stephen Joel Trachtenberg, who was the 20-year president of GW.
How do you
Um,
do that as a first gen student, just through
well,
the
by the way, I
student?
want to just be clear. I wasn't first gen going to college. I was just the first. My parents both went to college. I was just first. They went to Long Island University.
Oldest, yeah,
Yeah,
paid to play for your family. Got
but
it. Thank
but I
you for
think
clarifying.
my parents were both immigrated to the United States, so I'm first generation born here. They both went to Long Island University, which, with all due respect to LIU, I don't think gave them any context in sort of helping me with my own college search, 20 years later when I was going to do it. So
Where did your parents come from, Scott?
my mother immigrated here from Germany in 1952. And my father immigrated from Egypt by way of Paris in the later 50s. So kind of a classic American mutt over here. My grandparents are Russian, Polish, Syrian, Yemeni, and all Jewish. So a kind of an interesting everything here.
Wow. Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess maybe next time I need to start before the junior year of high school to get the full picture.
But anyway, I think just because of how involved I was in student government and campus life, and I think it was different times back then. I mean, there wasn't like social media. I mean, there wasn't any of kind of the barriers I think that actually exist now between people. I just was very fortunate to kind of cross paths with President Trachtenberg, and he took an interest in me. I mean, I was involved in an initiative for GW to adopt an honor code or a code of academic integrity that caused me to have to deal with him quite a bit. And for whatever reason, we forged a friendship. And at one point, he asked me what I was going to do when I graduated from college. And I said, I thought I might go and work at GW. I thought it would be fun to work there. Maybe I'd go do a degree in education or something. And he kind of quickly sniffed that I didn't really know what I was talking about. And so he said, please just go to law school because you can basically do anything with a law degree, no matter what. And if it turns out you don't like working at a college, at least you have that. And so I did. I went to GW Law School, but it wasn't really, frankly, to be candid, out of any conviction to be a lawyer. It was more of the advice that kind of the most utilitarian degree you could kind of get after college was a law degree. And so I went to law school, and yeah, I loved law school, had a great experience there, and ended up getting a clerkship with a federal judge after that. And then on September 15th, 2001, moved to Wall Street to work at a law firm.
Tell me about the clerkship. I read a bit about John Garrett Penn's bio, and honestly, wish I could have interviewed that guy on the podcast because it sounds like a pretty amazing story.
He is one. He's passed away since I clerked there. He was one of the first African American jurists kind of put into the federal bench. I think he was appointed, if I recall, by Jimmy Carter
Yep.
in the 70s. And he served as chief judge of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, and frankly, in his time, saw everything. And he was a great mentor and friend. He was very generous with his law clerks in terms of spending time asking you how you saw the issue that you were dealing with in chambers, kind of making you walk through your whole argument, not being afraid to poke holes in it, and being open to you poking holes in his argument. He was very collaborative that way, and I learned from him that the best work products at some level are team efforts, even if you have to put your own individual signature on it, as he was the one who had to do. The work product kind of reflected a team effort, and he was just a very elegant jurist. And to this day, I still hear from his wife, and they kind of adopt the whole family of law clerks. You can imagine over 25 years on the bench, he accumulated a fair number of law clerks over that time, and we're still in an email chat group together, and it's kind of very weird, the paths that you cross and the ties that you develop with people.
Yeah, it sounds almost like an alumni group to a certain regard, or a fraternal,
Yeah,
connection or something.
or
Yeah.
all of the PhDs a particular professor might have. You kind of form a weird little family over time, and you always you only may be connected by one thing, but that one thing happens to just be very powerful in terms of the experience, and you're getting it at a very formative stage of your life. And so there's definitely impressions I still have of him, again, almost 25 years later.
I do wonder, and I did not expect to go there, but we meander sometime in the show. And when you think about like that affinity that you feel, right? The memories you just shared, and I'm sure a bunch that you won't share that you're thinking of right now, and you know that family and that connection. It wasn't about the district court. It was about John Garrett Penn and
Oh,
that sort of individual. And it does make me wonder when you think about how we stay in touch with alumni and friends, that so often it's about, uh, Brown or Brown football or the international relations program, which in the end are just brands that represent actual human to human relationships. And so I think about like Barrett Hazeltine being this iconic professor at Brown University. If I got communication from Barrett Hazeltine instead of Brown University, it would be such a game changer. And instead, what do we do now? Today, he probably has 10,000 Facebook friends, would be my guess. And I am going to shoot him a note after this because I owe him a note on something. But you do wonder kind of, are we missing something about like that human to human connection in a more scalable way, which certainly applies to your memory of John Garrett Penn.
You just kind of said the key word, which is scalable, because at the end of the day, people build relationships with people. You don't build relationships with a building. You don't build relationships with a mascot. You may have fond memories of that mascot, but it's almost always while you were enjoying a game with other people.
Well, they're emblematic of
they help you remember. They help you remember something, but you don't go. I wish I could spend time with the mascot. So but the scalability, I think, is a really interesting question, because in order to get, for example, faculty to document who they might have affinity with, let alone do something to take advantage of that affinity, requires a lot of people power. These things don't happen accidentally. And I think the scalability of personal relationships in this regard, in our context here, is a difficult one, because it really does require a lot of labor to kind of take full advantage of it. And of course, some people, some vice presidents, some faculty members, some football coaches are better at it than others. And how you kind of support different people. And some people are willing to do it, and some people, you couldn't make them do it with a gun to their head. So, it's I do think, though, you're right. I mean, people connect with people, and the more we can ground our efforts in recognizing that, I think the better off we'll be.
We'll come back to scalability later, and I'm going to try hard not to talk about technology because nobody wants to hear about it on.
I feel like I should get nervous anytime I see you write something down.
Oh yeah, you should be, for sure. So tell me about making the move to Cahill Gordon and Rindle, and sounds like an emotional time to make a move like that, and then a radically different area of focus. And I've worked with firms like that earlier in my career, and it's about as intense as it gets.
Well, I had 1 week off between my clerkship and moving to New York, and that was the week of September 10th, 2001. Of course, 9/11 happened, and I don't think we need to kind of go down that detour here. And then I moved to Manhattan on September 15th. I'm not really sure how it happened, but my mover showed up on time. The cable and the electricity turned on time. And I was supposed to start October 1st. And Cahill, of course, is on Wall Street. It's at 80 Pine. And I got a phone call saying, we'll pay you, but you're not starting till December 1st because we can't take you in right now. Of course, the offices first of all, the whole Wall Street downtown area was devastated, and Cahill's offices needed to be cleaned like everyone else's. The firm needed to regroup. And of course, it was not a fun time to be in New York. So you start in a city that's kind of reeling and trying to pick itself back up and figure out how to move forward. I mean, I can remember everything from all the anthrax scares that were going on to, frankly, Rudy Giuliani going on Saturday Night Live to say we need to laugh and we need to start moving forward. Kind of this whole weird confluence of memories about that period of time, which was kind of an interesting way to start my time there. I enjoyed being at Cahill, though. I had a good time there. Again, you'll hear a theme. I was very fortunate to pick up one mentor partner early. His name was Peter Sloan, who I did most of my work for, and as a result had a very good experience there. Although when the opportunity to switch careers presented, it was not a good enough experience to keep me in the law, because at the end of the day, Brent, I just didn't have a passion for it. There were plenty of associates who had a passion for litigation or had a passion for corporate deals, and they loved it. You could tell every day they came in hungry, ready to do it. For me, it was a job, and I didn't come in every day like, yeah, let's litigate. And so when I had the chance to switch careers, it wasn't really much of a choice.
Yeah, I think leading up to this point, there is almost nothing that you've shared that would lead me to believe that you'd be sitting in the seat that you're sitting in right now. And so clearly, you went down the path, you gave it a go, you had a good mentor, you could tell. And, I remember some of the same feelings. Like, there are people out there, maybe people are attracted to the sector in certain part because there's financial upside and that sort of thing. But when you get there, there is truly a difference between the people that absolutely love that work and the people that maybe hope that they would love it because I could make partners someday. And I know that has,
Just
rewards.
stop at, they hope they'd love it.
It is hard to fake it when you are in a room of people who truly love that sort of work.
Well, and you know what, and it really is. I mean, I think I was lucky I came into Cahill as a third-year associate, not a first-year associate, because of the clerkship. So I kind of got to skip some of the first-year stuff that the first-year associates get. The law firm model back.
I won't call it hazing, but it's probably the equivalent.
It's more like a meat grinder. The model back then, because it's changed now, of course, but the model back then was, we're going to take a first-year class of associates of 50 or 60 first years, and hopefully we end up with 5 or 6 eighth years. Who 3 or 4 of whom will become partner. So the whole thing is meant to ground down the people who either can't do the work, don't love the work, aren't smart enough for the work, don't have the stamina for the work, whatever it is. The old big law firm associate system, and maybe it is to some extent today, but back then it was, we're going to take 50 to end up with 5. And
it would make a way less entertaining version of Survivor.
Drawn out over 8 seasons.
And so at that point, though, given the portfolio of work and the JD and everything, you could have done a bunch of things.
Yeah.
What was it that brought you to this field of advancement? You had great student leadership. It sounds like strong relationships with the president at the time. But what were the options you considered, and what led you to go back to GW?
It was a very lucky circumstance. I was involved as an alumni volunteer. When I graduated from undergrad, I right away got involved with the GW Alumni Association. When I graduated from law school, I was part of the GW Law Alumni Board as well. And I was my 4th year out, so the year I was a 4th year associate, I was elected to GW's Board of Trustees as a recent alumni trustee. GW had 2 seats on its board for recent alumni. And they put me on the Development and Alumni Affairs Committee when I joined the board. And I guess I started complaining a lot about the alumni office, that you're never in New York, only when you want money, you're missing all these people.
Just like classic new
Yeah,
volunteer vibes.
exactly. Know-it-all volunteer. And one day I was a fourth year associate again at Cahill. And I got a phone call from Steve Trachtenberg, who's still president. And Mr. President, what can I do for you? And he said, Scott, I'm calling to let you know that this person, the alumni director, has gotten a different job and he'll be leaving at the end of the semester. And you're the biggest pain in the ass I've ever had about the alumni office. And I seem to recall your junior year of college, you thought it might be fun to work at GW. So before I start a search, I'm offering you the job. And if you don't take it, I never want to hear another word from you again. And he basically hung up. And I called his assistant, who had kind of been like a surrogate mom in college, Helene. And she basically said, are you coming for commencement? And I said, yes, of course. And she said, well, and those were the days where they paid for travel for the recent alumni trustees. So she said, I'm going to switch your flight so you could stay a little later. You and Steve will have lunch afterwards. And at this point, he'll expect your answer. And she basically said, I suggest you take the job. And I was 27 at the time. And Cahill had a mandatory retirement age of 67, which means you didn't have to leave the firm, but you couldn't be an active partner at that point. You had to go senior status or of counsel. You just couldn't be a voting partner after 67. And I thought, to allude to something you said earlier, am I coming here for 40 more years? Is this, assuming I make partner, is this it? And I really couldn't wrap my brain around a vision of that as my life, and thought, what's the worst that will happen? And so after talking to my own kind of personal board of directors, several friends, including the other recent alumni trustee, who was one of my best friends, decided to make the move. And now I'm in my 20th year of advancement work, 20 years later.
So take me through the first 3 months. It's one thing to be a know-it-all volunteer on the outside who shows up,
Exactly.
drops in for the meetings, and another thing when the rubber hits the road. And just take me back to that time.
It was a lot of drinking from a fire hose. Even though I was probably not as I was probably a little bit more aggressive in my complaining than I should have been while I was a trustee. The minute I got there, I understood that my complaints were validated and that it really wasn't the staff's fault. It was kind of a lack of a vision of the role of alumni relations in the life of GW. And as a result of major lack of investment in that program, both in terms of attention, prestige, and frankly, resources. And one of the greatest gifts Steve gave me when I started there was he gave me a special budget. And he said, I'm going to pick 3 universities and you pick 3 universities. And I want you to go meet the person who does your job at that university, go spend a day, shadow them, find out what they do, and start learning. And I will say, my first week on the job, it may have actually been my first day, the first phone call I remember getting was from Kelly Redder, who had my job at RIT. And she called to tell me that GW was a member of a group called Pequod, and I should plan on coming to their conference. And I was like, I don't even know what Pequod is. Turned out to be one of the most important phone calls I ever got, because building that network of people who do your job at other places, I think, is a critical component of success, no matter what level you are. That's why I find so much value in where we met in person finally at the Case Summit. The ability to go and just meet people who do what you do, who can understand what it means to have a crazy donor or a crazy president or crazy staff, crazy colleagues. There's very few people who kind of understand what these jobs really are. And so that was kind of one of the most important things. But the ability to go network with other people was an important aspect of it. Taking time to hear what my staff always wanted to do. Like if budget and authority were no object, what would you do? And there were some great people on that staff who had never really been given the opportunity to fly. And honestly, I think I came in because I didn't do this job anywhere else. I don't think I came in with the whole litany of we've never done that before, or it never doesn't work that way, or you can't. I don't think I was burdened by any of that because I didn't know any better. And so a lot of learning, and again, just lucky with the people I ended up surrounded with.
About Pequod, because funny, I mean, one of my first mentors in the space was Andy Shandlin, and he was deeply connected with Pequod, and a lot of the kind of just early, even exploratory conversations I had somehow linked back to that community. And it makes sense that between CASE and subgroups like Pequod and conference specific groups, that this sector is pretty darn good at building community and bringing people together.
Well, if this profession can't be good at that, then I don't know which profession would be good at that. I mean, this is all about relationship building, whether it's in the fundraising context, the alumni relations context. If we're not good at it, I don't know what other organization should be good at it.
And so, why was the Pequod kind of platform, if you will, so important?
And you could say the same thing about groups like CAAE as well. I mean, it's because at some level, alumni relations officers are not competing with each other. It's not like we're athletic directors going after the same coach, or admissions officers going after the same recruit, or even, development officers going after the same corporate or foundation dollars. At alumni relations, I'm not really competing with anyone for my own. I'm only competing against myself for the effectiveness of alumni relations. And I think because of that, people who have the executive director or AVP job, the top alumni relations job, are generally very forthcoming. They're willing to share experiences. They're willing to share ideas. And at the end of the day, these conferences turn out to be extended group therapy sessions that are really important because whatever I remember in Pequod, whatever question anyone would throw up on the listserv, at least two people had dealt with something similar at their campus and would say either, here's my experience, or pick up the phone and call me and I'll tell you what I don't want to put in writing. And, those relationships are critical in jobs like this. And maybe they are in other professions as well, but, I didn't have that experience as a lawyer. I didn't look to network with other associates at other law firms.
Look,
different.
Every industry has its version of the industry association and the conference, etc.
Yeah.
But there is truly no industry I have ever come across that is even close to as tightly connected. And we will say things like, this is a tight-knit sector. It so understates how connected this is. I mean, frankly, our whole podcast, it has basically been a tag, you're it. Who else did we interview? Who haven't we interviewed? Everybody knows everybody, and it really does make it special. The flip side being, there is risk.
Everyone knows everyone.
Everybody knows everyone. Reputation, certainly matters, and there is, maybe risk associated anytime that you're in what might be described as an echo chamber. You even shared, right, coming in from the outside meant that you didn't maybe have the biases or preconceptions that others have. And so that is probably one of the challenges in a sector that is so tight-knit. How do we make sure we are cross-pollinating with, people and ideas that come outside, which obviously by way of alumni boards, advisory boards, et cetera, we get some of, but there are limits obviously in what a volunteer can truly influence, right?
That's right. I think that's right.
So when you think about, it's one thing to kind of get the call and be told that you are taking a role back at your alma mater by a longtime mentor. It's another thing to decide, you know what, I like this career path. I could see myself at 67 or at least 57, in this space.
Please not 67. Please.
Fine. You're not trying to make partner in the sector. That's okay. But to go to your alma mater is one thing.
Yeah.
To say, you know what, I'm going to move across the country and I'm going to be an advancement professional is another thing. And so I'm just curious, like, at what point in the GW journey did you decide, I actually love this work? And then what led you to think, but maybe I should try it somewhere else?
So, as usual, these decision points are usually beyond your control. And so for me, what happened? Well, first of all, I had a great experience at GW. I was running the Alumni Association. Over the 4 years I was there, I picked up the annual fund, leadership annual giving. My role kind of grew beyond just running the alumni office into really being part of the advancement division overall, and having connections with lots of parts of the university, whether it was student affairs or the career center. I mean, just really kind of building connections across the campus. And in my 4th year working there, Steve announced his retirement, and I thought, okay, that's interesting. I wonder what that means for me. And literally 2 months later, USC called. I got a phone call from a headhunter, Betsy Berkamar, and the call was essentially, USC is looking for a new head of its alumni association. Your name's come up a couple times. Would you be willing to talk? And again, he had just announced his retirement. And the question I asked myself, Brent, was exactly the one you posed, which is, am I good at this profession or am I good at working at GW? And because if you're a GW utility player, you go work anywhere in the university. It's really because you know the university backwards and forwards. You have the relationships, at least at that moment in time. And so are you a GW utility player or are you an advancement professional? And I decided that I thought I was more an advanced professional, or that I wanted to be more of an advancement professional than a GW utility player. And so I threw my hat into the search, and ultimately ended up being successful in that search process. And so Steve's last day at GW was my last day at GW. And then I went to the University of Southern California.
And what was the actual job that was posted that they were searching for?
It was Associate Vice President for Alumni Relations was the if I recall, was the job that was posted.
And we do not talk enough about the importance of search firms and how much talent movement really is driven by search firms. As a leader, I'm not
You're
sure.
You're leading me into dangerous waters.
I know. So I'm trying to pose this in a way that is that you won't regret,
or that you won't regret.
Or that I won't regret. No regret-free zone. But how do you think about the role of search firms, both as a leader who is trying to attract talent in a competitive environment, but also thinking about your career as a professional? If they hadn't reached out to you that day, there's a good chance that we could still be talking, but we wouldn't be talking about an 8+ year run at the University of Southern California.
I mean, I think like all things, they bring positives and then maybe they bring not so positives. I mean, for me, when I got to Carnegie Mellon, I had to do a lot of hiring my first 18 months at Carnegie Mellon. And I won't get ahead of the story. I think you're going to want to unfold over the rest of this. So I'll just say I could not have built the team that I built at Carnegie Mellon without a search firm. And the search firm we used was Aspen Leadership Group. And we literally would not be where we are were it not for the way they approached my situation. On the other hand, sometimes I'm curious about kind of the rationale about who gets called for what. Because I get called quite a bit today, and I was recently contacted by a search firm. I thought they were calling me about University A, turned out to be about University B, and I was like, how did you decide to call me about University B, but then not mention University A? You're doing both searches. University A and B are looking for the exact same candidate at the entry, at the basic surface level. How do you decide who gets called for A and B? And to me, sometimes it feels like there's no rhyme or reason to kind of who gets called for what. And so I think the search firms that are willing to kind of do the research and kind of look beyond who's in their stable inventory, I think bring a lot of value, and I could see how they could bring a lot of value. you could also understand at some level, people are just shopping the same list around kind of over and over again. And so it's sometimes I have trouble kind of understanding it, as much as I acknowledge they actually play a pretty critical role.
Thank you for going down that treacherous path with me. Now, USC, right? I mean, you basically at this point had lived
You'll promise to hire me if I never get called again.
You had lived your life, Rutgers prep, down to DC, up to New York and back.
Mm-hmm.
Southern California, very different, and at a time of incredible growth for USC.
Absolutely.
How do you go and just frankly fit in and learn about the basics of what makes USC USC? You knew GW cold at that point. And what advice might you have to others that are considering such a big change where both geographically, culturally, history, focus, it is so different?
Well, I think my experience at USC is a pretty good example of that, because I think when they started out with their search, I don't think I was what they were looking for in their head. I was from the East Coast. I was young. I think I was 31 or 32 when I moved there. 32, somewhere in the early 30s when I moved there. GW is not a big football place. Obviously, USC is a big football program. There was a whole bunch of, this kid is not what we're looking for, that I think ultimately turned out to be, maybe this is exactly who we're looking for. And I credit actually Betsy Berkemer, the headhunter, and I've heard this both from her and the woman who hired me, that at some point Betsy kind of said to them, maybe you shouldn't be looking for exactly what you think you're looking for. Maybe that's why you're looking right now. And when I got there, a piece of advice that I got at some point, I don't remember who it was from. It was about, don't try too hard to fit in. Make them try to fit around you. And I think it requires some level of self-confidence and self-awareness to be able to go into a community like that and say, I'm not going to change. You hired me the way you knew who I was when you hired me. So I'm not going to come in here and try to change myself to fit what I think you want when you already said what you wanted by hiring me. So I'm going to go in and be myself and hope that it all works out. And that would be the advice I'd give to anybody entering a community that's new, whether it's whatever job level it is. I mean, you want to learn the customs and the traditions. You want to know the people. You want to know the politics. You need to be knowledgeable about the community so you could do your job. But you shouldn't go in thinking, wow, now that they've accepted me, I now need to change who I fundamentally am to meet some notion of what I think they're looking for. And at some level, this is just a variation of, you're enough. Like, you were hired, you're enough. And go and be yourself. And it's okay when yourself and them have some friction and you got to figure out, all right, how do we coexist? That's all good. All that stuff can be productive. And that's kind of how I approached USC. I went in thinking they had their choice of a lot of different people. And they ended up choosing me. For better or for worse, they chose me.
It has to be somewhat overwhelming in a role like that to join an institution of that scale where you don't have those historical connections.
I'll tell you, the summer or the month before I started, well, first of all, I had like a very extensive search process with them. I think I went out there 3 times. I think I met upwards of 50 different people over the course of this interview process, including like a panel of former presidents of the Alumni Association, which I still remember very vividly to this day. But I remember one weekend, they brought me out so I could look for an apartment. And the woman who hired me, her name was Martha Harris, she decided to host a little cocktail party for me at the Alumni House so the volunteer leadership could meet me before I started. And at USC, I mean, not only did I have an alumni board, there's something like 50, 60 regional clubs, 13 women's organizations, Black group, Asian American group, Latino group, gay group, Jewish, I mean, whatever affiliation you could think of, there was a group for it. There were all the athletics booster societies that weren't quite under the alumni association, but were definitely related. So I remember going and just being like, wow, like there's no way I'm remembering anyone's names, first of all, but there was a history book of the university that had just been published. And so they gave me a copy of it, and all the alumni leaders were given a chance to sign it before they presented this book to me. And there was a woman, her name was Darlene Reed. And if anyone from USC at that time watches this, they're going to go, wow, I can't believe he's pulling that name out. She was a longtime volunteer. She'd been there forever. And she wrote, "Scott, we're counting on you, Darlene." And that's how seriously they took the job and the alumni cult, the Trojan family. It's real. The Trojan kind of mafia, that alumni mentality is very real. And at some level, I chose to, believe me, I'm not saying it was perfect every day I was there, but by and large, I chose to kind of just find comfort and strength in that versus being intimidated by it.
Right.
Like
imagine, I mean, I think in any leadership role, people spend a lot of time thinking about what should I do? But I feel like one of the things you also need to focus on is what should I not do? And how do I be intentional about what I'm not going to do? And I would think in a role like that, at a place like that, coming in, you could have death by 1,000 relationships where you just feel like you need to get to know everyone. That could be a full-time job for 8 years and you would never know everyone.
That's right.
And you also wouldn't have gotten anything done. And so it's like, how do you think about focus when you are inherently in a role like that, that is so broad? And frankly, everybody probably wants to know you and kind of wants to think that you know every professor and every team and everything.
Yeah.
How do you just sort of create some guardrails and focus?
Well, I mean, at some level, when you go in, you do have to take in a lot of information, at least at the beginning. You need some place to start. And for me, I always want to start with, frankly, what the person who signs my paycheck expects. So at the end of the day, whether it's the president I work for now at Carnegie Mellon, the senior vice president who hired me at USC, I work really hard to develop an understanding with them about what their own expectations are for success. Because at the end of the day, if my boss doesn't think I'm doing the job she hired me to do, it doesn't matter how many volunteers like me at the end of the day. And so I really try to develop a North Star around the expectations that the person who hired me on behalf of the institution has. And I think in an alumni job, it can be easy to get pulled off of that because of all the input you're getting from volunteers. There's no job quite like the head of alumni relations. When you're the head of advancement, there's a lot of filters in place between kind of the broad mass and who gets to you, frankly. But when you're in the alumni relations job, your job is to be the filter of that broad mass. And so there is just a lot, as you said, a lot of inbound fire. And so at some level, you learn how to politely listen and move on. You learn how to figure out who are the reliable people that you want to include in your kitchen cabinet or your board of directors, your personal board of directors. At USC, I had a group of volunteers. I knew like these were like the 7 or 8 people I was going to call to gut check stuff with. It wasn't going to be all the presidents of all the organizations. There were 7 or 8 people who I knew I could just gut check with. And the decisions were mine. I had to own them. And I took a lot of crap in my time at USC for decisions I made. But I kind of had my center around what guidance I was going to take.
Can I ask a question on that note, Scott? Because part of me then feels like, the skeptic in me feels like maybe there should just be 7 or 8 people on the board, and it should be those people. I mean, I think that is one of the issues of scaling these boards and advisory, and it's almost like we're inviting this issue of, I want to engage you and ask your opinion, but end of the day, I'm going to have a couple of people that I really need to turn to, and I got to own it. And it does seem like sometimes we go through a lot of motions around engagement and advisory and boards. And when push comes to shove, it just doesn't matter.
Well, and that's why, there is kind of a bit of a Goldilocks problem with these boards, right? Because 7 or 8 people to me is the perfect size if all I want is to bounce my ideas off a group of people I trust and get their feedback. 7 or 8 is not the right size if I need people to go out and evangelize with other people what it is we're trying to do. And so at some level, I actually I grew the USC Alumni Association Board of Governors. USC has 22 colleges. They used to kind of rotate colleges that could have representation. We just let everyone have a rep because because the goal was I wanted my message to get carried back to other places by members of the board. And so the board was actually not charged with telling me how to run the alumni program. They were charged with helping develop the message about what we were doing and carrying it back. And so it depends on what you want to use your board for. You're right, you cannot make decisions with a 50-person board, which is why a lot of people have like an executive committee model where there's actually a designated group that's actually making the decisions. And those are often not the same people that are informally advising you. But I think you, in an organization like USC, like Brown, you need a slightly larger group of people to help you carry the message out to different pockets of alumni to help you. I had board members who helped me with deans, who helped me with athletic directors, who helped me with coaches, because their relationships, I could leverage their relationships where I didn't have them. And so it requires a lot of time and, elbow grease to work a board. But I think if you do it right, boards can actually can pay off. But you have to know why you have them, like what they're for, and you have to manage expectations. If a board comes in thinking because you let them think or because you told them, you really wanted their advice in figuring out the whole program, and then it turns out you don't. It doesn't take them very long to figure that out. That's actually on you because you didn't manage their expectations properly. And so if you're clear about what you want, then they can choose. Do I want to be part of that or not? Do I want to be part of Scott's board, or do I care about the fact that I'm basically volunteering to work for Scott? If they're okay with that, then that's a great asset to me.
Well said. And you've got a lot of experience thinking through this, and
a lot of mistakes helped me form that experience.
No doubt. Well, I want to conclude here on USC and make sure we have time for the CMU experience, but you were there at a really transformational time while the largest at the time capital campaign in history had been announced in the education sector. And I read a quote about that effort that said in 6.5 years, as much money was raised for USC as in the previous 6.5 decades combined, which is truly remarkable. And so I guess just reflections on operating at that level. And frankly, what was your personal favorite experience, most memorable experience during your time at USC?
Wow, that's a big question, Brent. I don't know that I have kind of a most memorable experience, because when I think about my time at USC, I immediately think of people. And there's several people who just prominently play in my head, whether it was being at alumni awards, being at the Rose Bowl, being at different board meetings, at our first women's conference, a whole host of experiences, frankly, kind of blend together in a very weird way, where what I see are people. I think being part of the Trojan family for the 8 years that I worked there, it was an incredible privilege. And the relationships I built there, some of which sustain now 8 years after having left. But I was very fortunate to both have the experience of running the Alumni Association and then becoming campaign director for the campaign you were just talking about. And I think one of the things that I credit USC with for fundraising at that time was a very clear understanding of where the university wanted to go. And it wasn't just the president, it was the provost, it was the deans, it was the trustees, had a sense the university had a role to play. And that philanthropy was critical to the university being able to achieve that. USC was not embarrassed to talk about its fundraising. It wasn't embarrassed to honor its donors. And I think a lot of that fueled the success of the campaign. Now, whether some of that fueled some of the trouble USC's gotten into over the past couple of years, I think is beyond the scope of this proceeding. But at the time anyway, it really was the ability of the leadership and the key donors to really come together and say, we're going to achieve something here.
Yeah. Yeah, beyond the scope and also well covered in prior episodes. So we'll just leave that be.
Sure.
And, that being said, there aren't a lot of folks who probably started in the Pequod circuit and then ultimately took on a campaign director title, which probably was a bit of a bridge to the current role that you're in. And so
it was the bridge. It was the bridge.
And so tell me about that. And you probably had a bunch of, friends from that circuit asking, is that kind of like going to the dark side in a certain regard? And just what
first of all, I've never believed that development was the dark side. It's never just been.
I didn't say you did, but I'm just saying somebody out there might think that way.
I always believe that alumni relations is a business function, like anything, like the admissions office, the registrar. It is a business function. The universities, colleges, private high schools, whatever, they do alumni relations to achieve something, whether it's recruiting, advocacy, fundraising, whatever it is. There are business objectives for why alumni relations. It is not just to try to keep every person ever graduated from your place happy. That's not the business objective. And I understood that very early. And so I was perfectly happy for my alumni relations programs to complement, benefit, support, be benefited by, be supported by development. I have no problem with big donors winning alumni awards. I have no problem with big donors being invited to speak. Who else would you invite but the people that invest in you? And so I remember, though, at the end of my 5th year at USC, which was the first year of the campaign, at my annual review, the senior VP who I was working for, we had my annual review. And, of course, great year, awesome, hope you're well. Here's your letter for next year. Anything on your mind? And I said to him, I just want you to know I'm starting to get bored. I have 4 years at GW, 5 years here. I feel like I've got a lot of this down now. I've built up a great team. Some of this is on autopilot at this point. And I'm about a year to 2 years away from getting bored, really bored. And I'm telling you this now because I hope when we have my next annual review, we'll have figured out some morphing of my role to kind of give me some more juice. And his name was Al Checchio, who was the senior VP of University Advancement at the time. And he actually said, most people don't tell me that until they're resigning. So thank you. 3 months later, he and the president asked me to become campaign director. And I think because I put out there that I didn't have a specific role in mind, but I put out there, I need a little different action. I need something to kind of keep me engaged. And in a weird way, again, with 22 colleges, there were 22 chief advancement officers he could have picked from. There was a slew of people who probably wondered, how did the alumni person become the campaign director on the fundraising side? Forget the alumni relations side. But I think there were a lot of inherent skills that transferred, which is basically the organization of a lot of people to try to get a common thing done. That's something alumni relations people do very, very well. And so
Berkhamer reached back out about Carnegie Mellon, or what was that next step?
I got a phone call from Manny Berger at Witt Kiefer telling me about the Carnegie Mellon role. And it was, again, the classic line, your name's come up a couple times, but the president of Carnegie Mellon is wondering if you'd be interested in flying out to meet him. And I had done 3 years as the campaign director, 8 years at USC, and Al wasn't going anywhere. So, Manny Berger called me to let me know about this opportunity, and that the president wanted to know if I'd be willing to come out and meet. president was meeting a few people. He didn't want to put people through the whole search process if he didn't feel there was a connection. And so I went out, and I had never been to Pittsburgh before. I really didn't know much about Carnegie Mellon, except that it had this kind of brand around technology and drama. It was highly ranked. It was private. And it was closer to my family in New Jersey than Los Angeles was. And ended up coming out here and really kind of falling in love with Carnegie Mellon. It's a very unique community. It's a little quirky. It has this AI brain and this drama brain, and it all kind of coexists very peacefully and naturally together, and end up really connecting with the place.
Tell me, Scott, about what you're most excited about. It's been an incredible period of growth at Carnegie Mellon, and I think you're just one of those institutions that's at the intersection of so many of the technology waves that we're all living through right now, but sort of also deeply connected to Pittsburgh, and frankly helping make Pittsburgh become a bit of a magnet, you know, in the same way that Silicon Valley has been historically.
I think that's right. I mean, you know, we're one of the top computer science places in the world, and we're the official partner of the Tony Awards, like all at the same time. And I think that kind of dichotomy and how it exists so naturally up against the story of Pittsburgh is what makes Carnegie Mellon such an exciting place. You know, I'm starting my 8th year here at CMU now, and we've built an incredible organization. You know, I don't want to kind of end this without saying a little bit about my time at Carnegie Mellon, in that when I started here, you know, we had to hire 4 out of 6 direct reports, 5 out of 7 chief advancement officers. There were about 40 vacancies in a division of 180 people. So there was a lot of rebuilding to do, and there was a real commitment from the president and the provost and the deans that we were going to do this together. And so we hired chief advancement officers that have been, frankly, the linchpin of, I think, what our success has been. One of the things I'm most proud of in my tenure at Carnegie Mellon is the relationship with the deans. I think I shared with you, we've built what I call a federal model. I don't like the words central versus decentralized. Those words are generally forbidden in my presence. But I say we've built a federal model where everyone's got a role to play, but we do have one way of doing business. And that's something I'm as proud of as the actual dollars that we've raised. We announced a $2 billion campaign, and with 2 years to go, we're at 1.9 billion. And a similar statistic to the one you quoted about USC, although at a different scale. I think what we've raised in this campaign is equivalent to what was raised in the last 3 or 4 campaigns. So been a tremendous period of growth and proof of concept that a place can do it. And it's been a great team effort.
It's a good reminder that it might feel like to the outside public, to the world, that Carnegie Mellon's not that different today than it was 8 years ago, let's say. And at a macro level, perhaps it isn't. But when you look at what the actual process of team building, setting an ambitious vision, and then going and executing can do beneath the surface, even if Carnegie Mellon broadly feels maybe kind of the same, there can be a tremendous amount of change and impact generated.
Well, you know, the fundraising is not in service of its own goal, right? I mean, the fundraising is part of an overall effort to move the university forward. And even though it's kind of fundamentally Carnegie Mellon, I think the place that it's starting to occupy in popular culture is kind of greater than it's been. I think the university's willingness to tell its story and be proud of it has increased. You also got to remember, Carnegie Mellon is a young university. I mean, Carnegie and Mellon only merged in '67. So, you know, fundamentally, this is like a 55-year-old university that punches above its weight in so many different categories against places that have a lot more money and, frankly, a couple centuries of history on us. And so it's a place I'm really proud to be part of right now.
I watch a fair amount of CNBC. And I am curious, it seems like the PR game at Carnegie Mellon has been very strong in recent years. And I'm wondering, is that an underleveraged tactic for universities like yours? Because I bet there are a lot of your alumni that like seeing Carnegie Mellon in the backdrop on these other channels. Is that intentional? Is it just sort of accidental with all of the tech convergence?
No, I think it's gotten more and more intentional. I mean, I think last week, I don't know if you saw, there was something on, you might have seen the metaverse package that was on a lot of the NBC networks. That was an intentional move. It didn't happen by accident. About a decade ago, they may have been content for that to have happened accidentally. But I think there's kind of an understanding now, and maybe it's a little late to the realization, this stuff doesn't happen by accident. You've got to have some purpose behind it, and understand that it's okay to be out there telling your story. I mean, you could look at the Tony Awards as a classic example. The reason why we've invested in that partnership, sure, it tells a story of a drama, fine. But you know what, Brent, we're never going to a bowl game. So the national exposure we get during a 3-hour CBS national telecast, worth its weight in gold, and whether you're a theater kid or not, frankly. And so looking for these opportunities to tell the story and to cut through every other university trying to do it at the same time, right? We're not operating in a vacuum. So looking for those strength points and exploiting them, telling the story around them. I think it's negligent to not be doing that at this stage of the game, which is why we've invested a lot in our university communications and marketing division. We just hired a great new vice president who started last year. And we're really looking to kind of grow the role that function plays on campus. Just like fundraising, it's not mission adjacent. It's actually mission critical that these functions are as good as the university they represent. What's the point in having top programs if they're represented by mediocre fundraising and marketing programs? It's worth investing to make these programs as good as the ones they represent.
I love that. Great concluding thoughts. Like, if we are going to set a standard in AI or machine learning, why not set a standard in advancement too?
Yes, I think that's right. And I think it's integral to the success of where we want, successfully getting to where we want to go.
As we conclude, I want to just ask you, are you hiring right now? And if folks want to be in touch, what's the best way to do that, Scott?
Well, first of all, the best way is to LinkedIn. I get a lot of LinkedIn from case conferences, and I just spoke at a conference in June. I'm always willing to connect with people on LinkedIn and hear people's questions. But, Mory at cmu.edu. I'm not sure what we're hiring right now. We always have some positions open now and again. In every part of the division, because we've invested not just in our fundraisers, but in our donor relations, our communications, our annual fund, our research team. All parts of our division have gotten investment over this period of time, because you need the whole thing to make it work. I mean, you can't just have great fundraisers with no support, no professional services that back them up. So we're always looking for good people.
Scott, I just want to conclude by giving you an opportunity to share 60 seconds on a recent experience that you've had being a donor.
Yeah. I'm really proud. I just did an endowed scholarship at GW, which is something I've been working really hard to be able to do. I'll give credit to my good friend Donna Arbide, who's the vice president there. She and I have known each other almost as long as I've been in this career. She was the alumni director at Miami when I started at GW, and I met her pretty early. So I've known her a long time, and GW couldn't be in better hands than with her. But she basically prospected me, and I was going to make a gift, and she did the old, have you ever thought about what else you could do? It's the 225th anniversary, 200th anniversary for GW. And she baited me. But I was thrilled to be able to do it, and really glad that she actually inspired me to set my sights a little bit higher. I've just gotten my second report from the student that has my scholarship there. It's really amazing to kind of see it from the donor side. I've been an annual donor to GW ever since I think was a sophomore. But to actually kind of get an impact report as a donor was a little trippy, but very gratifying.
Well, Scott, that is a really great thought to conclude with. And
I've also learned to be very careful with what people say to you, because you don't forget anything.
Hey, this is all just one big discovery call at the end of the day, but I will dutifully log my contact report. No, in all seriousness, it was just, you were clearly, we talk a lot about asking people for money, right? And how to engage donors on this podcast. And I think we forget how common it is for us to all be donors.
That's right.
Maybe not that common where, we're yet having that kind of major experience, if you will. And so it was really cool to it was a reminder that sometimes we can feel, bad about asking for money or guilty, and seeing like how genuinely happy you were to step up to that level as a donor was just a reminder that we should unabashedly, while respectfully, collectively set our sights higher. And just seeing your joy was really inspiring.
Brandon, it's first of all, I appreciate that, and you observed correctly. I took a lot of pleasure out of being able to do that. It's a common misperception that this job is about asking for money. Donna didn't ask me for money. She asked me to think about what I could do for GW. I rarely literally ask people for money. This job is about finding out what people care about and lining it up with something CMU is good at or wants to be better at. And very often the question that's asked is, what can I do to help? Not what can you give us? And to me, to me is the sweet spot where you've led this conversation, you've built this relationship in a way where they ask you, what can I do to help? If it literally gets to me asking for money, I think I've done something wrong in how we've curated this conversation. And I think it's a common misperception. I hear all the time from people, I don't think I could ever ask people for money. And these are people who have to ask a lot harder tasks of other people than of helping people to make a gift. The reality is, if someone accepts an appointment with me, they generally know what I want to talk about. My title gives it away pretty much every time. And so I think it's invite people to kind of think a little differently about what the objective is. It's not just about asking for money. It's about lining people's passions, aspirations up with yours. And that to me is the sweet spot of this profession.
Beautiful thoughts to conclude with, Scott. And here is to rarely asking for money and raising a ton of it in pursuit of all of the missions of the folks that are listening here. And I just want to encourage everybody to take Scott up on the offer, follow him on LinkedIn. You can find him easily, and just thank you. And I look forward to continuing to get to know you in the coming months and years. And with that, I'm going to conclude today's episode with Scott Mory, Vice President for University Advancement at Carnegie Mellon University. Take care, everybody.